With that, we are ready to start our panel. So Rusty.
Welcome to the first Atlanta Innovation Forum. How about that? Okay, you guys are pioneers. I am Rusty Gordon. I'm the CEO of Blue Chip Athletic Solutions, and we help in the recruiting process. Thank goodness there's people like Diane that are providing factual information about recruits. The tough part, I think even Eric, our coach from Georgia Tech here will admit that. We recruit for 20-some of the top collegiate football programs in the country. We provide the recruiting software. And our claim to fame is the last 13 national champion football teams have used our system. I'm an Auburn guy. Unfortunately, 6 of those were Alabama, but we'll get over that. I'll tell you, I'm very excited about, I have the best seat in the house, very excited about tonight. We got together in the room just to make sure we knew what the logistics were, and a discussion broke out among the panelists, and a couple of things happened in that was exciting to me. One is these folks really know what they're talking about. That's always nice. They are really good. You're talking about real experts here. But then their passion. You can tell in the dialogue and the conversation, not only informed, but very, very passionate. I know many of y'all are the same way. I'm a bit the same way with a background in baseball that's allowed me to be very passionate about it. And for me, I feel like this revolution in technology kind of coincided with the book Moneyball. How many people in here have read Moneyball? Right, so I was fortunate enough to get to review Moneyball before it was published and be able to make some comments and changes to that. And all of a sudden, we got to see that factual information came to the surface, and all of a sudden, the things that we thought about sport was not the same. So I'd like our panelists to come up and take a seat, and without further ado, I'm just going to ask a few questions. You guys give me some questions on Slido. I'll see if I can handle it. And I'm going to let them a bit introduce themselves as we go. And I think I'll stand over here to this side. And we want to talk about how technology is really affecting sports. And I call it an explosion. I think you all do too, because of all the different disciplines. We have all disciplines represented tonight by people that are really at the top of their class. And yet we have some disciplines that are not represented. For instance, eSports. Now we have people like Vonda that have an interest in that, want to share some information on that. But we have a lot of areas of sports, the wearables, which are really kind of changing the game, are well known to everybody on the panel, but not a single representative here. So the explosion goes in every direction. And so I would like to start and ask each person to tell us not only a little about themselves, but kind of what their goals and dreams for technology in their area of discipline are. Okay, and we're going to start with Eric Revenos because he's here in the first chair. And Eric is a basketball coach at Georgia Tech. He's the assistant basketball coach there, and it's got a long history in that we were talking about. So Eric, tell us just a little bit about you, okay? You came from the Georgia Tech on the West Coast, I think, right? Is your way here?
Exactly, more or less. Yeah, I'm originally from California. I grew up near the Silicon Valley, which was different when I was growing up there. Went to Stanford, played basketball at Stanford, went overseas of all places, went overseas and played for 4 years in Japan, learned some Japanese, and went back to business school at Stanford, got my MBA, met my wife. She thought Stanford GSB class in '95. She thought she was meeting one of our, future eBay guy or something high tech, and she married a basketball coach. So I appreciate that. But I decided I wanted to follow my passion of coaching. I'm always trying to use what I learned in business school and apply it in creative thinking and solving problems in all different ways. I was then an assistant coach, fortunate to get on staff at Stanford. For 9 years as assistant coach. We won 4 Pac-10 championships and went to the Final Four 1 year, so I had a good run. I was a head coach at University of Portland. And that was great, and I had some good success there, and then the success dried up a little bit, and that was over. As it happens in college coaching, I unfortunately landed at Georgia Tech, starting our 4th year. Technology for me, and I love it, and I like the bells and whistles. Technology for me every day is about trying to figure out how to make the best practice. Are we utilizing technology based on how they slept, what they're eating, where they're at, who we're playing, what the training loads were previously, everything, so that we can design the best practice. We were talking about it in our discussion back there, and that's what drives me in utilizing technology, because the stuff that's becoming available, you can make better informed decisions like anywhere with technology.
Yes, we had a fascinating conversation about overtraining actually back there, right?
Yeah, no, and so that's for me, as I realized, I had a team at University of Portland that was a bunch of studs that worked their tail off, yes sir, no sir, run through a wall for you. We had the best year in school history. I was coach of the year, all this great stuff, and that, looking back, I'm like, did we work too hard? Could we have worked less and been better? Which is like, breaks your heart as a coach, because you're such a hard-working group you're so proud of, but you're always trying to work smarter.
Diane, you're a clear innovator in analytics. What do you have to share about dreams and goals?
Certainly. Well, and my background is in technology and data. I worked at IBM, and then I'm a serial entrepreneur. So I really wanted to combine my background in data and tech with my love of sports. So really excited. This is a dream come true for me. But when I think about what I want to do with the technology is I really want to integrate the data so that coaches and athletes can make really good decisions. It will never replace, the athletes have still got to perform, the coaches still have to coach and make decisions, but we would like to help inform those so that we can prevent injury or have that perfect practice or have a winning game plan or get that recruit that's really going to make a difference for the team.
Sweet. So I'd like everybody to help me welcome Vonda Wright to Atlanta. She's been here about a year, okay? So let's give her a welcome. A great addition I know she wasn't expecting that, a great addition to our community. Vonda heads the sports practice for Northside and was brought in specifically to build that practice into the premier practice in Atlanta. So I think it's a great addition to the community. And in the early dialogue, we got some interesting insights. So tell us a little bit more and what your dreams and goals are.
So I'm an orthopedic surgeon, and my subspecialty within orthopedics is sports medicine. And the beauty of sports medicine is because we are really the preventive arm of medicine, because there is tons of data, some of which I produce myself, but others that lots of other smart people have shown that mobility is medicine. And if I can, what drives me as an orthopedic surgeon is if I can harness the power of mobility and save your mobility, whether it's by surgery or smart technology, I am actually going to save your life, because we know that there is nothing besides nutrition and smart mobility mobility that will change the trajectory of your health. And that's just not an opinion or a fitness chick up here. It is real data. So that is what puts the why in why this orthopedic surgeon is interested in sports medicine and mobility. But a few years ago, as we were talking about, I got a little tired of going to orthopedic meetings and talking about the new screw that we're going to put in a bone, or the new technique for where to put the ACL tunnel, which I'm sure even at a coaching level you've heard. So I started going to innovation conferences. And I am fascinated by exponential technologies. But I think of the 5 or so that are out there, AI will change what we're doing in a very positive way. Watson's doing it now. You're going to do it for sports. Augmented reality is already everywhere. Did you know that arc of the golf ball is not real? It's actually just, I'm just kidding you, you know that. that in track and field, we don't have to just guess who's first, right? I'm just kidding you. You don't even know me, and I'm kidding you. But augmented reality is going to change sports medicine and sports in general. I said this out loud in an athletic training meeting about 2 months ago, and I was booed, but it's okay. I believe that with augmented reality and the fact that your visors will soon be on your contact lens, not a visor, that you will soon be able to feel the interaction of the game and put you in the game next to the star on the track, right? Who's going to want to actually collide with each other anymore? And I think evidence is the burst that we're seeing in eSports, which I'm happy to talk about more. So augmented reality will change sports. I predict in 20 years we will not have contact football in the same way we have today, and you're welcome to boo me too. But the two things that I'm really interested in, because I'm a biologist at heart and geeky enough to have a favorite scientist, are the emerging fields of genomics and the biome, the human biome, right? So I am interested in genomics, not only because it's cool, but for one reason. It's because parents think today that by playing their kids harder, faster, stronger from the age of 18 months, that they will produce world-class athletes. And what they're doing, and I have many examples of this in my practice, because it costs a lot of money to put your kid in these traveling leagues, instead of saving that money in a 529 to send your kid to college, they are spending $10,000 to $20,000 to $30,000 a year to let 11-year-olds travel around the world playing a game that they do not know they're going to be elite at, right? So it is obviously, look at me, I'm getting all red and passionate about it. If we can help predict for parents who the superstars will be based on genomics, that is one good step. But I'm sure Dwight will tell us, as I can tell you, because I am married to a two-time Stanley Cup champion, and none of our 6 kids are world-class athletes, right? Genes are not the only thing. So what all you guys are doing is very important as the next step. So I'm interested in genomics. The last thing I'm interested in is totally untapped. And if you want to make some money, you better get into this. It's the trillion bacteria that live in your gut that replicate every 20 minutes. You can influence what they're doing because they influence your brain and your performance. We know that we can already affect heat stroke by changing what your gut flora is doing, and 20 minutes, like if you're on the track and it's 97 degrees wherever you're running, we can pop you a little bacteria pill to make you better in the heat. And it is completely untapped right now. So I'm really excited about those two technologies, and I know this is a wireless technology, so if you want to put a little sensor with the bacteria you give us, fine. Right? Fine.
That's exciting. So anybody catch any passion so far out of this group? Yeah, okay. We're glad to have her in the Atlanta market. We also get to hear, y'all, from somebody that has done it, been there and done it. So you got the privilege of hearing from a gold medal athlete. And I have the good fortune of knowing one of his coaches and who spoke about him often. And so, Dwight, will you tell us a little bit about your thoughts? He's now passing on his wisdom. And so tell us a little bit about how technology affected your career and how you see it affecting careers in front of you.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Steve, where are you? I'm very disappointed in you. I'm also a 6-time USA champion, but I'm not going to hold it against you. But for me, I actually started off in the sport when I was 8 years old. And to your point, it wasn't definite that I was going to become a world-class athlete because I was such a poor athlete at that time. Then it kind of progressed. And in 2004, I coached myself to an Olympic gold medal. And a lot went into that. I had to become a student of the sport. I had to become aware of my own body, and I used the technology for that. I used the Omega Wave, and I used that to determine whether I was overtraining or not. And it told me in one instance that I needed to take 10 days off from training in order to optimize my performance. So for anybody that's in that coaching space, taking 10 days off is so difficult. Just from your psychological standpoint, you feel like, hey, if I take 10 days off, I'm going to lose. I'm not going to be able to perform at a high level. And I can just kind of attest that to one of my athletes that's here tonight, Amani. We recently had to take 10 days off from training, and she came back stronger and faster than ever. So I use the empirical data coupled with the physiological standpoint from the sensors that we use in our training to determine whether we should train or shouldn't train. So I use a device called HeMotion. It measures your foot contacts, your ground contacts, your stride rate, your stride frequency, and I can determine whether an athlete is moving faster or slower, whether we need to take some rest from their training. So I would like to see, for me in the sports space, preventative measures, a device that can detect and prevent athletes from getting injured. Because in track and field, unlike in team sports, if you're injured, it's over. Whereas in football, you can probably play 50% or 75% and still perform at a high level. But unfortunately, in my space, if you're 50%, you may as well just retire because you just can't perform at a high level like that. But again, I'm honored to be here. I'm excited about the forum.
Well, thanks. That's very good. Y'all start banging me with some more questions, and I'll have Abby make sure that I'm on. I put the code in right. So you mentioned something, though, Dwight. You mentioned about the mental side when you were told to take off, how much of a mental issue. And in our dialogue earlier, Monda, you mentioned that about injury and mental, et cetera. And then, Eric, you live with this. You were saying this is what you live with daily. Wonder if we could before we dive into the physical side of technology and physical and analytics, what's the play and what's the challenge from a mental perspective?
From a coaching perspective, we're not as it's hard to manage the mental thing. We were talking back in the meeting about how, the conventional wisdom is that kids have lost some of their resilience and stuff, but how you handle as a non-medical professional in coaching and how you handle their mental aspects and what they go through. And as college students and at Georgia Tech, doing a lot to be more sensitive and more, and by sensitive, I don't mean softer, I just mean more skilled, I guess, is the word for handling someone going through something and how you communicate with them. So I actually enjoy that a lot in terms of being better at that. It's like a technique, and I think we're doing it better. If kids are becoming less resilient, I think the upside is that we're becoming better at working with them. So I'm glad, as a human being, I'm better at reading those things and continue to get better at it. But it's tricky, and it's just, and how you, and the technology can help in the sense that it gives you actual facts. We were talking about how one of the things I would wish, sometimes I wish an athlete twists their ankle and the trainer will say, he's good to go as pain tolerates, which is like, he's not gonna make himself worse. It's just, it's if he can go, he can go. And the guy's sort of hobbling around, and like in my mind, I've always said, I wish I could, someday I know the technology will exist for me to feel that pain. Like just to all of a sudden, give me a little dose of that, see what it feels like. And are you kidding me? That's all, you're not going because of that? Or, just be able to tell, so.
There'll probably be an assistant coach whose entire job is the pain assistant coach, right?
Yeah.
He's got whose turn is it this
Whose turn
time
is it?
to take the pain? Oh, I don't want the headache. No, not that.
I was once at a golf tournament as the players doc, and there was a sign up in the locker room that said, golf is played on the 5.5 inches between your ears, which I think, I've never been that great of an athlete, you can speak to that, but I think what I see in athletes is if they've done the physical work, most of the game is in their brain, and that's certainly true after they've been hurt. If you blow out your ACL and you've spent 9 months of hard labor and you've not been in the field and you haven't gotten the endorphins that you normally get and the reward, it can be a real struggle to trust your body again to come back. So I would like to see harness technology like voice recognition technology. There is technology that will analyze your voice and can tell you how stressed you are. And maybe you're holding up your phone and it's glowing red because you're so stressed out. Then you can self-medicate with some modern technologies like meditation, right? Because we're doing yoga with athletes that we never thought we'd do yoga with because it was too soft, right? But how about harnessing voice technology and meditation to overcome these stresses that our athletes clearly go through?
Yes, and from a psychological standpoint, the actual athletes, they function from a factual base. They like to see facts. And because their BS meter is so sensitive, you just can't tell them anything these days. And I would like to see just some technology that would just reaffirm that on site, that if they're injured, it can detect where they have that injury or where they're having psychological issues that mentally and how we can address it on site, because we use video to help determine whether they're making mistakes from a physical standpoint. But if we had something that can monitor from a psychological standpoint, that would help us forecast how to help an athlete optimize performance.
Right.
And that's a great point. We have the Athos shorts that we were talking about, like, and that's them. the doctor says they're okay, you say they're good to go, but they're still afraid to go. But if you show them the data of their strength numbers and you show them, the ability to show them the data of their hamstring strength, their quad strength, and how it's stronger than their weak leg now, and they're ready to go, it's a lot better.
Rebuilds that confidence.
Diane, you've got your career in trying to get more facts out there, right? So, and Dwight's just kind of called us all out in the technology field, right? Yeah. So, how's technology going to close that gap between the athlete and technology itself?
Certainly, and I'm glad to hear you say that about athletes, and I think coaches are getting there too. I think Rev's an exception. He loves technology and data, but I think you would agree that a lot of coaches make more gut and emotional decisions, which there's nothing wrong with that because that gut's based on experience, right?
They think it's either or.
Right.
I'm not a stats guy, so coaches' aversions to spreadsheets even, or just the stats. It's just like, no, that helps you paint the full picture.
It's a tool in the
You
toolkit,
wouldn't
right?
buy a business you'd look at just a spreadsheet, nor would you, without visiting it. You're not gonna buy it just visiting it without looking at the spreadsheet. You're gonna do both.
Exactly. And that's what we want to do is just help inform those decisions. And, we have certainly had our challenges with coaches adopting technology. That's been our biggest challenge in our business is convincing the coach to use analytics because it's new and different for them. But what we find does drive adoption is when it truly meets a need. So I'll give you guys an example. We did the Georgia Showcase here in Atlanta. It was the first year they held it here. They've held these around the country. These are for football players at the high school level that did not get a D1 offer. So the D2 and the D3 coaches come out to see these guys try out and go through a camp to see if they want to offer them to play at the next level. And we were the technology provider, so all the coaches in that used Scout Smart to look at the players. And what we saw was our usage went up significantly because they had a very timely, which is important for coaches too, because there's so many things going on, timely, specific need. Yesterday, we were sitting in a conference room. We got a text from a coach. We've been trying to get him to download our mobile app for 2 weeks. Suddenly, he realized he did not have a 2020 quarterback, and so we were scrambling to get him all set up and send him a bunch of quarterbacks that he could take a look at. So it really is about not having the coolest technology when it comes to coaches. I think that's my experience. It's about making sure you're giving them something that's really going to help them today, and they can immediately go in and use it and understand it.
Were you the one did you tell me about the 40-yard time for offensive linemen story? You didn't tell me that.
I don't think that was.
So, and you'll appreciate this. So they go to the NFL Combine. I heard this story, and I know just enough of it to tell you. But they do the 40-yard sprint time. They get these big, offensive linemen doing the 40-yard sprints, and so the coaches get the data on what his 40-yard time is, which doesn't matter for being an offensive lineman.
All you do is got to get off the line, right?
So what they said, it's all about leverage. So a coach and analytics staff that was open-minded to the data tried to look at that and tried to figure out what can we get out of that test. And they learned everything's about leverage. And so the height of their hips and how they maintain a low position coming out of it and how long they stay low. So they have the video technology to measure that. So they can take the video of it and measure it. So now for analyzing offensive linemen, they don't care about the time, but how the hips are and how they come out of it.
That's a better indicator.
I would have been better at that than the actual time.
And in the track and field space, what I would like to see as well, many times they come up with these different inventions of technology without the input of the athletes. Yeah. And I think when you can use the empirical data coupled with what they're doing from a technology standpoint, then you can create the perfect gap, I would say, in creating the perfect app. But that's something that I would like to see because I've seen many times that they've used case studies on athletes that aren't elite, and they have tried to apply it to elite athletes when it's not really germane to elite athletes.
Right.
What I find in the technology process is that and maybe it doesn't happen here, but a lot of really smart people are innovating in a room and they're talking about ideas, and then they'll really formulate a solid idea. They may even go to prototype, and then they'll find a clinical champion like myself. Is this going to work in the hospital? I would encourage you actually, before you get off the napkin that you're drawing on. Find a clinical champion, because you can save yourself a ton of time. And many clinical champions charge you for it, but many people like me will have a cup of coffee and draw on a napkin with you. And it'll save you so much time. And it sounds like the same in sports, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll throw a tip in. I know I'm the moderator, but I'll throw a tip in. If any of y'all are doing things in sports tech that relates to health or preventive medicine or anything in that area, they respond well to clinical style data and tests because that's your market. And when I wasted a lot of money presenting information in a form and a format that didn't fit that, and I didn't get adoption. The first time I went in and put it in and said, hey, will you participate in a clinical trial with me, blah, 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 blah. We were all in. So there's a tip for the night, okay? And that leads us, there's a great question from the audience here, and that kind of leads to that question. And by the way, I'm not doing the seventh inning question yet, so keep them coming. But the question is that sports tech, by the numbers, does not seem to be growing at the same pace that fintech, financial tech, and some of the other areas are. And wondering why that might be the case. There seems to be so much breaking. Why is it? Anybody have ideas on why it's not? Yeah, Diane, I thought you might.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that is adoption.
Right.
It is making sure, I think that our sports industry's been a little bit slower to adopt. I think we're going to start to see much better growth now. And really what has kind of paved the way for us, especially with analytics, is all this performance data, all these wearables and all this data. Before that, coaches really weren't looking at as much data. Rev's been looking at stats for a while. But I really think a big part of that is just the fact that it's been slower to adopt. I will tell kind of a little funny story. We were at our intern, a couple of my interns came from Students to Startups, which is through Invest Atlanta, and they asked a question, and we were all doing an app to answer the questions, and they said, which of these technologies is Atlanta not known for? And they had fintech up there, healthcare and security, and sports tech. And I said, it better not be sports. And of course, it was sports tech that Atlanta is not known for. But I think that's kind of universal, that we're a little bit behind the growth curve.
Right.
The theory I'd have are two things. Or one, in my space of basketball, the NBA hires the best guys, and then they work in silos because it's competitive.
Yeah,
and
that's
there's
right.
30 of them. So the best people in basketball analytics and performance analytics are in our space. And they're in professional franchise. What's changing that, or what's going to change that, is the legalization of sports gambling. Because now there's going to be big money behind analyzing performance all over. So people will invest big money to get the data to be armchair quarterbacks. So the professional gambling, all that information, and then fans at games making in-game bets, you know, and that legalization state by state, as that's going, I'm sort of just fascinated by that, because I think that's going to change how we do things, and the data is just going to become more critical, like stock markets. So you're going to have an E-Trade type stock market webpage where you can go home at the sports and fantasy football and fantasy stuff where you're putting real money on it, the amount of investment, the technology of getting that information of how is that guy's closing speed, you know, and looking at that.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you, Eric. I just think in sports, we've just grown accustomed to just being antiquated and being myopic and not just seeing the future and where we could be and where we're going. I think the coaches, we're kind of, even me, I hold myself accountable as well. We're just stubborn at times and just don't want to believe the hard data. And I think once we kind of embrace that change and we can see it, because everything is factual, when you can see the facts, then I think we'll see an increase of participation in the sports tech space.
Let me play off that, and then we have another good audience question, but I'm going to throw a free-form question out here. We've watched the cost of youth sports go through the roof, and I was one of those coaches, and it cost $6,000 a year to play, right? Does technology offer any hope that we'll be able to return to, you know, a soccer ball in the field and a baseball bat and a ball in that sports, or do we feel like it's the cost of youth sports is rising?
The financial cost is rising. The physical toll on our children is rising. Do I see a change in the milieu anytime soon? As long as it is a financially driven model, right? Because it doesn't take anything to be a youth sports coach. You don't have to be this coach. to start your, if you don't like what your AAU coach is doing, right now you can just go start your own league, right? So, and somebody's going to pay you. So as long as it's a financial model, that's a big driver, right? There is a lot of talk within sports medicine right now to get the word out that we're doing what I call skilling our children to death, right? We're trying to make them better, but actually we're making them worse. We're giving 11-year-olds so much arthritis in their kneecaps that they can't function as adults. So the conversation has started, but right now it's a financial model. It's like
Right.
gambling. You cannot stop this now
Right.
because somebody's making a lot of money. So
Tough
I
one.
think we all recognize it, but I don't have a real solution, actually.
Tough one.
If we're the parents and we're the problem and the competitiveness and the focus and the opportunity to do these things, I think maybe if that data gets out there that playing multiple sports, if it gets conclusive and it gets so that people say, okay, they're still going to be incentivized, they're still going to have this focus on getting a scholarship or being an Olympian, but then they learn that, hey, maybe playing multiple sports might be better for them.
And Diane, I think that if companies like yours can definitively say that, because we say it all the time, less than 1% of all youth football players make it to an NFL field, but that is not enough data for parents right now. But if you could definitively say, unless you're scoring like this, at this age, you better invest in college, not sports, that would be helpful.
But a lot of the parents are living vicariously through their
that-
children.
that-
That's
They're
partially the
they're
problem.
calling me.
Yes, they're forcing the kids to specialize at an earlier age and not allowing them to have fun in sport. So I think that's pretty much a big issue that maybe we need to find something for the parents.
Something for the technology for the parent, y'all. The new
Technology.
sports app, okay?
Maybe
I'm
gambling,
Yeah.
they get the parents.
Yeah,
to
add
gamble.
one, just one stat, because I'm deep into baseball, I'll share with you, which is for every 100 kids that play Little League Baseball, seriously, one of them starts in high school in Atlanta. For every 100 that starts in high school, one of them starts in college. For every 100 that starts in college, one of them starts in Major League Baseball. So you can calculate those odds, and those are plus or minus 10% at each level, right? All right, let me hit a little different, because we may come back to, is there a need for regulation, something we don't like to talk about. But we've got this issue for driving need for data. This is a question that came from the audience, driving need for data. We have privacy concerns in health, HIPAA. And then we have security challenges that are pretty evident on a daily basis. As in sports technology and as advocates in the industry, how do we deal with this issue? What needs to be done? How should it be done? How do we deal with the issue of more data, but more, but privacy? Eric, go ahead. We're going to go higher.
For us, the NBA and the Players Association negotiate and then what they do, and that all the data that the Sports View cameras collect is out there, so they know how fast you ran, how hard you played. It's all data driven. The cameras recognize it. Now they get into sleep analysis and wearing monitors, and the Players Association's pushing back that they don't want that invasive thing forced upon the athletes. I've got an athlete now at Georgia Tech who we just got an Oura ring for that monitors his sleep, and it was voluntary. And I'm kind of uncharted territory with him in terms of that trust and that relationship, because I can see how much he slept on a Saturday night. And so I'm sort of, he's a senior and he can turn it off whenever he wants. I'm making sure it's clear that it's voluntary, but he knows he needs to improve some of his habits, his discipline in terms of making his goals. And so I think he likes having that, knowing that I'm watching a little bit, but it's a little bit uncomfortable. So it's a sensitive issue to try to monitor that.
In medicine, the conversation is around who owns the data, right? So if you go to the doctor and I collect a bunch of stuff on you, I don't have to give it to anybody. If you try to switch health systems, you have to sign a bunch of written letters that I can send it to your next doctor, because right now the ownership resides within the institution, but it's many of our beliefs that the ownership resides in you, and you get to decide who gets it, and it's not my data. So if you want to share your data, it's you who tells, it's you who gives the data. It resides with you, maybe in your smartphone, in all one place. There are companies who are doing that. But who owns the data is the big deal. In sports and analytics, it's who you release all this stuff
So I'm trying to make it so like he owns it still.
He owns
So
his
I'm
data
trying to,
and
I've
he's
set it up
giving
that way.
it to
And I
you.
want to make sure he knows he owns it. So I want to have that trust. If he wants to cut me off, he can. And that's what I'm trying to do, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
and
we
we're-
don't have a good reputation in that area. I mean, the teams don't have a good reputation in that area at all. Which goes to, some questions are coming in about video technology. It was touched on there. I know none of us may be experts in that field, but video in sports, you know, how is it changing the game? And then Eric and Dwight's about to get on this.
Let me just tell you right
And then
now.
what do we do with it?
It is changing the game. It's phenomenal information that you can share real time with the athlete. For example, I have athletes after every approach run, if we're doing the long jump approach, they'll come back and say, how did this look? Well, I can say, well, you need to push out a little bit harder, you know, create more frequency at the end, and put your foot down. Whereas in the past, when I was in college, I would have to have an old VCR tape. I have to go home at night, look at it, think about it all night, and wait 2 more days to try to make the proper execution. Now we can do it real time, so it's changed the game significantly.
Does it give you numbers? Like, does it say, like,
Yes.
so the video, it tells you how many, the stride
So,
frequency?
so
the
I can
length,
I
you
can
tell them?
detect their ground contact time, which should be about 0.10 seconds. And if it's like 0.15, I was like, okay, I need you to put your foot down and try to create less ground contact time.
And then you have that data to compare workouts over time. So you have a week of workouts, and you're saying Wednesday was different. Okay, what's going on?
I have 20,000 videos in my phone right now.
Yeah, and the data.
Literally, 20,000.
The NBA has these cameras. I don't know if you're familiar with their camera, the Sports View cameras that record the movement of all 10 players in the ball. And it spits out the X's and O, the X and Y coordinates of everything for the whole game and the time sequence and where the ball is. And so the coach can ask, you know, what's the best coverage against defensive coverage against those when those 2 players are involved in the pick and roll. What was our best coverage in that series? That's why the NBA playoffs was 7 games, and they're just going back to the data, and the coaches can ask questions. And if they're open-minded coaches, there's a back and forth. And what I've heard is the data scientists are really good at presenting it, but the coaches have to be receptive to it. But it's you know, it's just a lot of information, like any big data problem,
Right.
how to analyze it. But
think
it can
there's-
tell who for me, it's fascinating because it can tell who it is. It knows there's companies that you have to wear something, and the new technology now with video is there's a thing, and the ACC might start using it in basketball. You may see it with ACC and ESPN this year. It's called Shot Tracker, but that has to have an embedded device in each of the athletes wear on their shoe and in the ball, to identify them. Whereas the NBA stuff, it actually reads who they are, but the teams take that information and don't share it.
How can, I'm not supposed to ask questions, but I really, to follow up on that, do you think technology would ever, there's something about a coach that you can look at a kid and you know that whatever their stats says, they're going to be a superstar. Or there are plenty of superstars who have good stats who never can read the game well enough to find their niche. So how's data going to be the answer?
You have to embrace it enough to get a feel for what data is important. So like or what number is important for that athlete. So if contact number is an issue, I imagine that's something. For me, the analogy is if you're in the restaurant business, you're going to feel and walk into a good restaurant or look at a good menu, but you also have to look at where you're sourcing your food from, you know, where you're doing, like the numbers of the business, what's your rent? There's some data that drives the business. There's also a feel thing, like in location, there's some data about the location, but you're also going to stand on that corner and see how it feels. And that's how I think it is.
I agree. I think there are some subjective type things that only a coach is going to know, and you're looking at some of those in addition to the numbers. I think bringing the 2 together is great, and I also love video because it creates so much data, right? So then we can give more insights through all this great data that's being created.
And, you know, my dad always told me there are a million ways to skin a cat, and there's also a relative truth. So what was probably true when Bill Russell was playing basketball wasn't so true when Shaquille O'Neal played. You know, so I think we have to pay attention to the evolution of sports. And that data and that video that we have we can use and compare and contrast from the 80s to 2000s, from 2000 to 2019, and you'll see significant changes, especially in the sport of track and field.
And one of the things, you said something about applying it to unique elite athletes is a challenge. So what's your purpose for, what's the ideal, what numbers matter for that person? In basketball, if you hear like the loss of the mid-range game, the mid-range isn't a good shot. Well, that's, from a coach's perspective, they say, well, I don't like analytics guys because that makes no sense. And the reason that is because if you've coached a guy who's great at a mid-range shot, it's a good shot, even though it depends on what he's good at and what's the defense giving you. But analytics people say, theoretically, for all of basketball, that's a long two is not the right shot. But it depends on
context.
It's got to be to that person and to that defense. If that's what you're giving, the defense is giving you, and he's good at it, it's good.
The game has changed so much now. The three ball is, that's what everybody wants to see.
So let's take this to a different level, which is a great question that came in. You know, athletes never die, they just change sports or change their role in sports, right? So we have more everyday athletes than we have elite athletes, right? So where's technology's play in the everyday, and especially the workout? You know, CrossFit took the country by craze for a while, a lot of debate about it. So how's technology affecting the everyday athlete?
I think for the weekend warriors, it's giving them the opportunity to see, okay, where do they measure in comparison to the elite athletes? And I think that everybody has aspiration if you want to participate in sports. Like even me in basketball, I'm not very good at it, but I feel like I'm just as good as an NBA player.
Yeah.
So I think it gives them just something to look towards to. You can count your steps when you're walking. You can see how many calories you're burned. You can see your VO2 max levels and how that measures in comparison to elite athletes. So I think it's important. I think it's motivating as well.
Right. Vonda, I'm interested in yours because this could cost you a lot of money. Your answer could cost you a lot of money here. Tell me about it.
Well, you know what, interestingly, my body of research is surrounding musculoskeletal longevity. And so it's really it's interesting to me, how do we preserve chronic mobility? How do we, so we know that mobility can preserve lean muscle mass, such that if you sit around for 35 years, you're going to become a rump roast, not a flank steak, but a 74-year-old who's been active his whole life is still a flank steak, right, if you want to be graphic about it. But I think what technology and knowing what we're eating, smart nutrition, knowing all the sports science that have previously been devoted to elite athletes, whether it's how to train, how to eat, how to sleep, how to track, has enabled mere mortals like myself, which is what I call it, mere mortals, to buy more time, to live longer, to be healthy, vital, active, joyful longer. So I don't think the technology for mere mortals is about ever performing like you perform. I think it's all about, I am as old as I am, I cannot train the same way as I did when I was 20. I have to be smarter. You know, Olympic athletes like Dara Torres, who returned to the Olympics twice after having her first child, in her 40s, trained completely different than she did when she was 20 and grinding out 8 hours a day in a pool. That is the same kind of technology that mere mortals can use, because we know more about how you guys train. We'll just translate it down, right? That's what I think is happening.
Good. That's really good. Well, kind of put this thing in reverse, right? And I got a follow-up question to this, but one of our audience members pointed out that 45 years ago today, I think it was today, but it's certainly at this time, Nolan Ryan pitched 239 pitches in 13 innings. And if I remember right, he came back on 3 days rest and started again and threw 2 no-hitters in his career after that, okay? And now we're pretty much on 100 pitch counts, right? So what's happening? Is there a change here? Is technology telling us lies? What's going on, Dwight?
Well, I think overtraining. Now we've become so accustomed to train all the time that it's virtually impossible for an athlete to throw 300 pitches these days, because their body just can't sustain it. Just from a musculoskeletal standpoint, the body would just break down because it's too many repetitions.
Good. Yeah, he was the first guy that trained as a pitcher, but he trained in a very measured basis. So that's an interesting observation.
But he is a special anomaly. He is special and always has been and always will be.
Just the best.
I mean, even Tommy John with the original Tommy John surgery, he came back to pitch more than anybody subsequently who has had Tommy John surgery. To your point, the ulnar collateral ligament, the Tommy John ligament, sees forces with every pitch, like 7,600 Newton meters for you physics people out there, that overcome what we can rupture the ulnar collateral ligament in a laboratory with a robot. So I think pitching in itself is a biomechanical wonder. So if you're pitching your kids since the time that they're 3 and their bones are all deformed, and then no child pitcher makes it to the major leagues. Nobody.
Yeah.
I mean, major league pitchers did not start out as child pitchers. So get your kid out of pitching if you want him to be a major league pitcher. But to your point, you can't overuse a body like this for 30 years and expect them to sustain.
Excellent
At a high level.
observation. Excellent. I got a couple of questions. We're kind of headed into the end. These two questions, and one of them came from the audience. These two questions I would like each of the panel members to maybe address, okay? So the first one is, what in sports technology concerns you? What are you bothered about in sports technology, or where is your concern? Tough question, huh? I'm going to claim that came from the audience.
I would say off the top of my head is just we talk about the removal of play and experimentation and the analysis of things and how that's a detriment. And then we as coaches, myself included, then enforce that. So you read any coaching book, they talk about playing games and doing different things. Anything you would read for kids, they do say for us. But then, so getting too analytical and some people work that way, but taking the fun out of it.
Okay.
I agree with that. I mean, I think that even though I'm an analytics person, I think we want to make sure, the thing I love about sports is what's unexpected, that crazy last play. And I actually had a professor at Georgia Tech who has been one of my advisors, and he says, there's so much randomness in a game, it's really almost impossible to predict. And I like that. So I think you're right. I think we need to use data to make better decisions and not overtrain or pick better recruits, but let's keep the fun and the unexpected in sports.
I agree. I think it should be spontaneous. We put a tremendous amount of pressure on the athletes as it pertains to college recruiting. There are a lot of 2-star, 1-star athletes that are equally as good as the 4 or 5-star athletes, but they're not given the opportunity because maybe they didn't test well on certain tests. Even at the NFL Combine, they use this data of how fast you run a 40 to determine how good you can play the game of football. And I think sometimes it's beneficial, but in those instances, I think a lot of elite or talented individuals get passed on, and they never get the correct opportunity.
Right.
I love technology, and not much scares me, except if we get to the place with real-time data analysis and gambling that we are piping in stuff about, okay, if you do this, and people are human, it's probably going to happen. If you do this, the odds will pay out X and such, and somebody is gambling on a game. Sports isn't going to be pure anymore. There's something, why do people like the Olympics? Because it's so just human and pure, and I just don't want to ever see sports become what it's not, right? So that's what I'm afraid of.
I want to jump in on that just a little bit for the entrepreneurs in the crowd, too. This is the Innovation Forum, and so I want to challenge you. One of the things back to Moneyball was, first, in technology, we're pattern freaks, right? We develop technology that figures out patterns and projects patterns, and that's what it is. Then we get addicted to patterns. And Moneyball showed us that we're addicted to the wrong pattern. One of the things that didn't make the book that we talked about in baseball was using your closer in the most difficult situation in the game, not in the 9th inning. which a bunch of youth coaches had gotten together and started doing. 10 years later, that's now adopted by the pros. You follow me? So we can look at patterns with AI and technology, and we may miss the opportunity to innovate. So the challenge out to the group is to think about that. All right, so now here's a question. I think we're going to wrap on this question, which is, I'm going to give you a magic wand. It's a wireless wand. It's a wireless innovation wand. I want you to wave it in the air and innovate a piece of technology that you want to see today. If you had it, your life would be better tomorrow. Okay? There's the challenge. I've sold you guys as an elite group, all right? And Eric, I'm going to push you on this, okay? I mean, you make your living on 18-year-old kids, man. What can we do for you?
One, to feel their discomfort, like to have that. I think I'm pretty empathetic, but if I could have that thing where I could say, Doc, let me feel their pain. I like that. I'm sort of distracted by that. But overall, we have so many different things. I think the video technology is really fascinating. Like the ability the video camera seeing patterns and doing that, and then so for us to be able to ask the data to videotape things, high school games included. We watch high school games and then be able to search that data and say, okay, find me the player that plays the hardest that's over 6'5".
Yeah.
And they videotape that high school game. And the NBA, they can do that. They know how far. Find me the guy that played in a 40-minute game and ran over 3 miles. Yeah. So he's working hard. You can search by those things at the NBA level, but to have that, and then, just that video technology, we're close, but just really pushing that down so we can all use it.
Perfect.
Yeah, and
Diane,
no surprise. Yeah, I want a data wand, right? So I love what Eric said and agree with that there's the data, especially for high schoolers, is in so many different places and so many different sources. I just want one to bring it all together and integrate it so we can answer those questions.
You want to be data czar, high school sport.
I want to be the high school data czar. Thank you.
Anna?
Well, as your mobility doctor, 68% of us in this country do not invest in our mobility every day, and that's why we're dying of sedentary diseases. So you need to either invent something that mimics skeletal muscle contraction, which we know releases a protein called clothos, which makes us all young on the inside. So even if you're sitting around, you need to invent something that makes our body act like it's moving, or you need to invent something that is so overwhelmingly motivational that we'll do it on our own. Otherwise, this country is going to die of sedentary death. And if we look around on the streets, that's happening.
Wow. Somebody can make a lot of money off that and actually do some good. Right?
That's a tough act to follow. But for me,
A 6-time U.S. champion and a 5-time world champion.
She's saving mankind. What do you got for us? Go ahead.
If I had a wireless wand, it would be something to forecast injury, because for athletes, we cannot perform if they're injured. And even for the spectators, we hate to see that LeBron James is injured, or Kevin Durant or Klay Thompson, that they're injured, and we only can assume, what if? And I want to just have that wireless one where I can know and forecast so I can prevent those athletes from being injured so I can help them optimize their performance.
That's sweet. I'm going to add one thing to this as well, and it's certainly like, I'm glad Dwight had to go between Vonda and me, right? But participated a lot in the NFL Combine and some of those. And right now, all the technology and most of the data that's being gathered is athletes at their best and at their freshest. Almost all team sports are decided when athletes are playing tired. It's the last 2.5 minutes of the first half and the last 2.5 minutes of the game, right? And no one's building their information off of that. And the same thing with a lot of the conditioning is conditioned with that in the back of the mind, but not the front of the mind, right? So there you go. There's another one. When you look at wearables, think about how that might be. I'd like, if y'all don't mind, join me. I think these folks brought a lot of interest and a lot of passion. Thank you for the questions, and I think everybody has agreed to hang around just a little bit if anybody wants to ask some questions. And thanks for being at the first Innovation Forum. Abby?